Imagine a world where nature itself seems to have rebelled against order. These are not the manicured fields of Flanders or the geometrically precise plains of Prussia, where war was waged like a game of chess. This is the boundless, ancient, suffocating forest of late 18th century North America. Here, beneath the dense canopy of ancient oaks and maples, an eternal twilight reigns. Even when the sun is at its zenith, the air is thick, saturated with moisture, the smell of decaying leaves, and a sticky fear. In this oppressive silence, broken only by the cry of a jay or the crunch of a dry branch, a living red river moves. This is His Majesty's Infantry Regiment, the elite of the British Army, a symbol of the unbreakable power of the Empire on which the sun never sets. They march, gasping for breath in their wool uniforms, tailored for the cool European climate, not the stifling American summer. Each soldier carries almost 30 kilograms of equipment: a musket, a cartridge box, a knapsack, a canteen, an entrenching tool. Straps dig into their shoulders, sweat blinds their eyes, chafing the skin under their stiff collars. But they dare not break ranks. Discipline is a religion, and the sergeant's cane is its prophet. They are trained to march shoulder to shoulder, creating a wall of fire and steel capable of sweeping away any enemy. That's what they were taught. That's how their fathers fought. That's how empires were conquered. But here, in this wild green labyrinth, their strength becomes their curse. Suddenly, the forest explodes. This is not the organized volley they are used to. It's a chaotic, ragged cannonade, coming, it seems, from everywhere and nowhere at once. Bullets whistle not from the front, where the honorable enemy should be, but from the flanks, from the rear, even from above, from the trees. An officer in a tricorn hat, who had just ordered the ranks to tighten, flails his arms and falls face down into the moss, his powdered wig knocked into the dirt. The drummer, a boy of about 15, drops his sticks, clutching his shoulder. Panic, cold and sharp, pierces through the veteran ranks. They raise their heavy, brown besses, but there's no one to shoot at. All around are only tree trunks, fern bushes and smoke, slowly creeping along the ground. The enemy is invisible. He is a ghost. He is the very earth that has decided to reject the invaders. To truly grasp the scale and paradox of this confrontation, we need to roll back time and look at a map of the world in 1775. The British Empire was at the zenith of its power after its victory in the 7 Years' War. London was the financial heart of the world. The Royal Navy reigned supreme over the oceans, and the British infantry was considered the best fighting machine of its time. It was a system refined over centuries, a rigid hierarchy, impeccable logistics, inexhaustible resources. Opposing it were 13 disparate colonies, lacking a central government, a treasury, a navy, or, most importantly, a professional army. From the perspective of any military expert of that era, the outcome of the conflict was predetermined even before the first shot. How could a rabble of farmers, shopkeepers, and smugglers stand against professionals who had turned war into an exact science? British generals such as William Howe or John Burgoyne viewed the upcoming campaign as a police operation to quell a rebellion. They believed that 1 or 2 major battles would be enough to defeat the mob of riffraff, hang the instigators, and bring the colonies back into the fold of the crown. This fatal underestimation of the enemy, mixed with imperial arrogance, became the first nail in the coffin of British rule in America. However, history had other plans. The colonists, deprived of the ability to wage symmetrical warfare, intuitively stumbled upon the only possible path to victory: asymmetry. They could not field an equal number of bayonets against the redcoats on an open field. Any attempt to play by European rules ended in disaster, as happened at the Battle of Long Island or Camden. Washington's regular army, trying to imitate the Europeans, often suffered defeats. But where the regular army ended, something else began. A people's war. A war of small groups. A war of attrition. At the heart of this conflict was a deep technological and tactical gap that the British were never able to overcome. The main weapon of the British infantry was the smooth-bore musket. It was a reliable, heavy weapon that could be reloaded quickly. An experienced soldier could fire up to 4 shots per minute. But the musket had one significant drawback. It was monstrously inaccurate. The effective firing range did not exceed 50 to 70 meters. A bullet, flying out of a smooth barrel, rattled within it, and its trajectory was unpredictable. This is why European tactics required dense lines and volley fire. Only in this way could sufficient density of lead in the air be created to hit the enemy. The soldier did not need to aim. He just needed to hold the musket horizontally and fire on command. Americans, especially those living on the frontier, the border of settled lands, were armed differently. In their hands were long-barreled rifled rifles, the famous Kentucky or Pennsylvania rifles. The rifling in the barrel spun the bullet, giving it rotation and, as a result, stability in flight. An experienced shooter with such a rifle could hit a squirrel in the head from 200 meters away. But this weapon had its own drawback: slow reloading. The bullet, wrapped in a greased leather patch, had to be forced into the barrel with a ramrod. This took a minute or even more. In an open field, under a hail of bullets and the onslaught of a bayonet charge, a rifleman was doomed. But in the forest, in an ambush situation, the rifle became a doomsday weapon. American militiamen quickly understood how to use this advantage. They did not aim for mass volleys. They chose targets. And these targets were officers. In the code of honor of 18th century European warfare, deliberate shooting at commanders was considered unthinkable. Barbarism worthy only of savages. Officers were gentlemen, bearers of culture, intermediaries in negotiations. Eliminating an officer turned an army into an uncontrollable mob. But American farmers did not read treatises on military honor. For them, war was a job of defending their home, and this job had to be done as efficiently as possible and with minimal cost. If eliminating one person in epaulets would force 100 soldiers to retreat, then so be it. The British Army found itself in a state of cognitive dissonance. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, who didn't follow rules, and who disappeared as soon as they approached. This created a second, no less important layer of conflict, the psychological one. Imagine the state of a British soldier. He is thousands of miles across the ocean from home. Letters take months to arrive, if they arrive at all. Food is often spoiled. Worm-eaten meat, moldy hardtack. Pay is delayed. And all around, a hostile country. The local population, even those who did not take up arms, often refused help, hid provisions, and passed information to the rebels. Every foraging expedition turned into a dangerous special operation. Every halt could be the last. The constant anticipation of attack wore down the nervous system. Soldiers stopped sleeping. An atmosphere of paranoia reigned in the camps. The rustle of the wind, the cry of a night bird, everything caused a panic attack. An army that does not feel safe even in its sleep is already half defeated. The psychological aspect was particularly vividly manifested in the attitude towards the Allies. The British, experiencing a shortage of manpower, hired German soldiers from the Landgraviate of Hesse-Kassel. These professional mercenaries were disciplined and cruel, but their presence on American soil infuriated the local population. For the colonists, this was proof that King George III was willing to use foreign landsknechts against his own subjects. This did not frighten, it angered. It turned the wavering into convinced patriots. Every barn burned by the Hessians, every farm ravaged, added recruits to the Continental Congress Army. But even within the American camp, things were far from simple. George Washington, the commander-in-chief, was himself a product of the British military tradition. He served in the colonial forces, wore a red uniform during the French and Indian War. His dream, his idée fixe, was to create a real, regular army that could line up and defeat the British in a fair fight. Guerrilla warfare, militia, undisciplined farmers who could go home in the middle of a campaign because the harvest needed to be brought in. All this annoyed him. He called the militiamen unreliable, cowardly, greedy. The internal conflict of Washington and other founding fathers lay in the need to accept reality. They had to overcome their aristocratic notions of war. They had to learn to interact with forces they could not fully control. Guerrilla units acted autonomously, often without orders, based on the local situation. It was chaos, but controlled chaos, chaos that worked towards a common goal. Washington had to become not just a general, but a politician, diplomat, and psychologist, uniting under his command people with completely different motivations. From idealists dreaming of freedom to adventurers and ordinary people protecting their families. It was here, at the intersection of tactics and psychology, that the third philosophical layer of war was born. It was a clash of two worlds, two concepts of being. The old world believed in structure, in a pyramid of power, where everything descended from top to bottom, from God to the king, from the king to the general, from the general to the soldier. A soldier should not think, he should obey. The New World, born in agony, offered a different model: initiative from below, personal responsibility, the right to choose. Guerrilla warfare became the physical embodiment of democratic principles. A guerrilla commander was not appointed by a decree from London. He was chosen by the fighters themselves for his bravery and intelligence. If he lost the trust of the people, he ceased to be a commander. This created a completely different type of discipline based not on fear of punishment, but on authority and a common goal. An American fighter could argue with the commander, could propose his own plan, and this was not considered rebellion, it was considered common sense. British officers, encountering captured Americans, were often shocked by their audacity and lack of reverence for rank. They saw this as rudeness, but it was a new social reality. The transformation of the conflict became evident when the war moved to the south. By 1778, the situation in the north had reached a stalemate. The British held New York, but could not advance further. Then, strategists in London decided to change the vector of attack. They reasoned that in the southern colonies, Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, the Loyalists, supporters of the king, had strong positions, and the economy, based on plantations and slavery, was vulnerable. The plan was simple: capture the ports, rely on local loyalists, and roll up the revolution from south to north. At first, it seemed the plan was working. The British took Savannah and Charleston, capturing an entire American army. But as soon as they tried to push deeper into the continent, they entered hell. The Southern campaign turned into a brutal civil war, where neighbor killed neighbor and brother fought brother. There was no front line here. The war was fought for every homestead, for every crossing. British dragoons, under the command of Colonel Banastre Tarleton, became infamous for their ruthlessness. Tarleton knew no mercy. He burned patriots' homes, destroyed supplies, and his name became synonymous with cruelty. The expression, quote, "zero," meant that prisoners were killed on the spot. But this cruelty had the opposite effect. Instead of intimidating the population, it ignited a wave of fury so strong that it could no longer be contained. New heroes emerged, commanders of partisan detachments such as Thomas Sumter, Andrew Pickens, and the legendary Francis Marion, dubbed the _1_. Marion was a genius of maneuver warfare. His base was on an island among the impassable swamps of South Carolina. British regular units simply couldn't reach him. Cannons sank in the mire, horses broke their legs, and soldiers died of malaria. Marion struck with lightning speed. He attacked supply convoys, freed prisoners, cut communications, and vanished before the British could deploy their formations. He fought without a baggage train. His men lived off what the land provided: sweet potatoes, fish, game. They often lacked uniforms, sometimes even weapons for everyone. But they knew the terrain like the back of their hand. The story of Tarleton chasing Marion 26 miles through the swamps and eventually giving up the pursuit with the words, "Come on, boys, let's go back and we will find some other gamecock. For as for this damned fox, the devil himself could not catch him," became a legend that boosted the spirit of resistance across the continent. However, guerrilla warfare alone could not win the war. Coordination of efforts was needed, and here General Nathaniel Greene displayed his genius, taking command of the Southern Army after the catastrophic defeat of his predecessor, Horatio Gates. Greene was a Quaker, a man peaceful by nature, but who became one of the best strategists of this war. He understood the essence of the moment. He didn't need to win battles. He needed not to lose the war. He formulated a strategy that entered history textbooks. We fight, get beat, rise, and fight again. Greene divided his already small army, violating all canons of military science. He sent a portion of his forces under Daniel Morgan to the west, while he himself remained in the east with the main forces. This forced the British commander, Lord Cornwallis, to also divide his forces. Cornwallis, an aristocrat and an able general, found himself drawn into a deadly race. Greene forced him to pursue him across North Carolina. The culmination of this stage was the Battle of Cowpens in January 1781. It was a tactical masterpiece where guerrilla tactics and regular unit actions merged. Daniel Morgan, who commanded the Americans, knew that his militiamen feared British bayonet charges. They usually fired one volley and ran. Morgan did not fight their fear, he used it. He arrayed his troops in 3 lines. In the first were the sharpshooters, who were to pick off officers. In the second was the militia. Morgan ordered them, "2 shots, boys. Just give 2 aimed shots and run behind the regular troops." In the third line stood the seasoned veterans of the Continental Army. The British, led by Tarleton, fell for this trick. Seeing the militia flee, they decided victory was already in their pocket, broke formation, and rushed into pursuit. And then they ran into the stone wall of the third line. At this moment, the fleeing militiamen, regrouping, attacked from the flank, and the American cavalry from the rear. It was a complete rout. Elite British units were annihilated in an hour. This battle showed that irregular formations with competent command can be not just a hindrance, but a decisive factor in a general engagement. Cornwallis's army, exhausted from chasing Greene, weakened with each passing day. They won the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, but it was a classic Pyrrhic victory. The British lost a quarter of their force killed and wounded. They were running out of supplies, their shoes were falling apart, and morale was at rock bottom. Cornwallis was forced to retreat to the coast, to Virginia, hoping for naval support and rest. He chose the small port town of Yorktown as his base. This proved to be a fatal mistake. The trap snapped shut in the autumn of 1781, and here another factor played its role, an international one. The War of the Colonies had turned into a global conflict. France, Britain's eternal rival, entered the war on the side of the USA. The French fleet, under the command of Admiral de Grasse, managed to do the impossible. It blockaded Chesapeake Bay, cutting Cornwallis off from aid by sea. And on land, the combined forces of Washington and General Rochambeau's French corps approached Yorktown. The siege of Yorktown was a classic, proper siege, according to all the laws of military art, with trenches, redoubts, and artillery duels. But the irony was that it was precisely that, quote, one war in the forests and swamps, which had bled their army dry and deprived them of maneuverability, that led the British into this trap. Inside the besieged city, the British suffered from smallpox, hunger, and constant shelling. On October 19, 1781, the denouement arrived. The field before Yorktown presented a surreal spectacle. Thousands of soldiers in red coats, once the pride of the empire, marched to surrender. They threw their muskets into a pile, many weeping with humiliation. American troops, dressed in whatever they could find, stood opposite French regiments in pristine white uniforms with gold embroidery. Legend has it that the British band played the tune of the popular ballad underscore underscore quote underscore quote underscore underscore during the surrender. And this was absolutely true. The world of hierarchy, traditions, and linear tactics collapsed under the pressure of a new reality. But what does this victory mean for us today? Why, centuries later, do we continue to analyze the tactics of the underscore quote underscore 3 underscore and Green's maneuvers? The fact is that the American War of Independence became the first example in modern history of a successful people's war against a global superpower. It showed that the outcome of a conflict is not always decided by the number of cannons or the size of the treasury. The main lesson is that an army can be defeated on the battlefield, but a people cannot be defeated if they are willing to pay the price for their resistance. The British did not lose because they had bad soldiers or foolish generals. They lost because they tried to solve a political problem with military methods, without considering the specific terrain, the mentality of the population, and the logistical nightmares of a war on the other side of the world. They won almost all major battles, but lost the war. This is a paradox that will haunt great powers in the 20th and 21st centuries, in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, in numerous colonial conflicts. The American tactics of hit and run, using the terrain as an ally, relying on popular support, and, most importantly, infinite patience, all these became the foundation of asymmetric warfare doctrine. Greene and Washington proved that strategic retreat can be more important than a tactical victory, that preserving the army is more important than holding territory. As long as the army exists, so does the resistance. As soon as the British occupied a city, they controlled only the space within a cannonball's flight. Beyond the city limits began insurgent territory. Furthermore, this war changed the very philosophy of the soldier. In European armies, the soldier was a tool, a cog. In the American army, despite all its disciplinary problems, a new type of warrior was born, a citizen with a weapon in hand, who understood what he was fighting for. Initiative, resourcefulness, the ability to act autonomously. Qualities previously considered detrimental to formation, proved decisive in the chaos of real combat. We see this legacy today in the structure of special forces worldwide, where each fighter is a unique specialist capable of making decisions independently. Mentally returning to that dark, damp forest where we began, we see the gunpowder smoke dissipating. The redcoats have vanished, dissolved into history. Only the trees remain, silent witnesses to a great turning point. But the echo of those shots still resonates. It reminds us that even the most powerful force has its vulnerabilities, that arrogance and unwillingness to adapt lead to ruin, that freedom is not a gift, but a trophy that must be won, sometimes by hiding in a swamp, sometimes by starving and freezing, but always without losing faith in the ultimate goal. History teaches us that David defeats Goliath not because he is lucky, but because he changes the rules of the game. Goliath expects a sword fight and gets a stone from a sling. The British Empire expected linear battles and received a war of shadows. And in this war of shadows, a nation was born, proving that the will for freedom, multiplied by flexibility of mind, is stronger than any steel. This lesson is universal. It works in business, in politics, in personal life. When you face a superior force, do not try to overpower it where it is strong. Find your forest, your swamps, your Kentucky rifle, and impose your rules. That is how the world is turned upside down. That is how history is written.